Okay, so welcome to my session, Introduction to Azure DevTest Labs. My name is Mustafa Toroman. I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I work as a senior system engineer with a company called Authority Partners. Here are my Twitter and blog. So if I can be of any assistance, be free to contact me at any time. I'll try to help. I'm also Microsoft Azure MVP. And I have quite a lot of Microsoft certificates as well. I'm Microsoft Certified Solution Expert in data platform, business intelligence, private cloud, cloud and infrastructure. I'm also Microsoft Certified Solution Developer, Azure Solution Architect, so on, so on, so on. Microsoft Certified Trainer for the last 6 years. Also Microsoft VTSP. So, quick count, how many of you actually use Azure at all? Okay, you do. Did anyone of you try DevTest Lab before? Not, okay. So, with what is Azure DevTest Lab? Does anyone have a clue? Did anyone look at the solution before? Before we say what is DevTest Lab, I would like to answer another question. Why Azure DevTest Lab? Why do we need it, and what this solution brings us, and how can we use it? So, in traditional IT challenges, we have integration, we have security, and we have heterogeneous environments. So, when we look at everything from operations perspective, those are pillar stones that we have to follow, that need to be in line. When we looked at our infrastructure from two perspectives, application owner and data center administrator, we have different challenges. Application owners want rapid self-provision to develop and test. So they want to build their own environment quickly, not waiting for anyone, so they can just start working on their solution. Also, experiment and innovative, and scalability and load testing is very important, because once we done with development, we want to start test, we want to scale everything up and have a sense of how it's going to really work when we have a couple of thousand or even more users. From data center administrator perspective, there are different challenges. Like they have to maintain production SLA. There's a hardware budget. There's a licensing constraints, also resource connection with virtual machines, and so on and so on. The list doesn't stop there. So on Dev and Test on Microsoft Azure, application owners have agility. They have option to use existing tools and languages that they're used to. They have provisioning in virtual machines from pre-configured images, and leverage tools and services to perform scalability and load testing. That's the great part of the cloud, because cloud is all about you pay for what you need, when you use it. Once you don't need it, you can just forget about it and move on. On the other hand, administrators have different challenges. They want to control everything. They want to centralize visibility and governance. They want to secure connectivity to data center and the cloud, and also optimize price performance, because there comes a new issue with cloud, and that's price part. So what is the major issue when we talk about cost of such an approach in a cloud, Microsoft Azure or any cloud for that matter, is that you pay for resources that you build there and that are constantly running there. On traditional infrastructure, that was not a problem. You pre-invested in hardware, and you're probably going to virtualize your environment. It's basically virtualization going on for a long time, so probably any environment is already virtualized. So you're going to spin up virtual machines and don't care about how many of them is there until you reach a certain limit and see you cannot create any more. Then you will revision the environment and say, okay, let's delete this is not needed. But that's not an issue. Those unused virtual machines can stand there for a long time unless you hit that limit, because you already paid for the environment, you already invested in licenses, in hardware. Those idle virtual machines are not a problem there. On the other hand, when we have a similar scenario in cloud, that creates a problem. And why? Because, okay, so we give our developer access to our subscription. He spins up some virtual machines, he tries some things, and then he moves on. Those virtual machines are going to keep running, and they're going to create a cost. So unless someone takes care of that and revision constantly what's running idle, that's going to create a problem for us. That's going to create additional cost, and we're going to get a bill for unused stuff at the end of the month. And we absolutely want to avoid that. So Azure has a unique DevTest capabilities. It's a turnkey solution for DevTest labs. Only cloud to provide per minute billing. You're actually, so if you run a virtual machine for 10 minutes, you're going to be billed only for those 10 minutes. Once you shut down this virtual machine or delete it, you won't be paying for it anymore. There are also MSDN benefits for significant cost saving, because does anyone have MSDN subscription? No. Okay, yeah. Licenses, virtual machines you create in MSDN are actually around 40% cheaper than those that you have in production. So from development perspective of view, that's a big saving. And MSDN is a subscription that is intended to be used for development and testing. So around 50% of infrastructure is spent on non-production. So what we have in production, so environment we have in our production, we're going to build similar environment, not maybe as quality and amount of resources we spend for our production, but we're going to build a similar environment both for development, both for testing, maybe even some staging and pre-production. So around 50% of those resources we have in our data center are actually used on non-production. And this line here represents use of that resources. So all the resources are not used all the time. In traditional infrastructure deployment, it's a flat line. When we create development environment, testing environment, production environment, those resources all stay the same. On the other hand, cloud gives us, and now we have 80% of unused capacity. On the other hand, Azure gives us option to auto-scale and create on demand. So we'll create our resources when we need them. If we need more, we can scale them up. Once we are done with it, we can scale it down, or we can stop it altogether. So it can give quite cost savings. Okay, so what Azure DevTest Labs represent is that's the solution for fast, easy, and agile DevTest environment. It gives you opportunity to have fast provisioning, to automate and self-service, and to have cost control and governance over your resources. Once again, I return to that problem when you give your development team access to Azure subscription. Once they start spinning up resources, in time there are a lot of resources that no one knows what are used for. That's the issue. When I joined the Authority Partners, we did a revision of our Azure subscription, and we actually found around 30% of infrastructure that no one knew what was used on who even created it. So using traditional infrastructure and subscription to provision such environment, it's not ideal in terms of cost control and governance. That can create a problem. So in Azure DevTest Labs, we have option where administrator can create quotas, policies, templates, security rules, and dashboards for both devs and tests. So they can access the environment that was pre-created for them with some rules and some governance from our operations. It still gives us a solution that has fast provisioning, so developer can have a virtual machine whenever he needs it. In traditional environment, he probably doesn't have self-provisioning. He'll probably send an email or contact in whatever way IT support to create some resource for them and have to wait in line if there's too much work to do, or maybe the guy just doesn't like him and he'll keep him waiting around. So with DevTest Labs, you have self-provisioning. You have fast provisioning that you can create. Users can create their own virtual machines. With those machines, you can create them one, and they can be used everywhere by everyone. So if you create a template of your virtual machine, it can be that template can be shared between the users. Big part of it that it integrates with your existing tool chain. So Visual Studio, TFS, Visual Studio Team Services, Docker, Git, Chef, Puppet, Eclipse. This is not the final, so there's a lot of more tools going on. But you get a picture what I'm talking about. So DevTest actually support a lot of existing tool chain, and whatever your company uses, you can probably fit in there. So I'll start with a little demo and try to show you how things are done. So I'll create a new DevTest. For location, I have to choose West Europe because my subscription has a limitation on just a couple of data centers. This is a subscription I get from Microsoft for demoing, so it has certain limitations. One option that you can see here is auto shutdown. So the idea behind this is you pay for a minute. So every minute you use a virtual machine, you're going to pay for it. But if you're not using it, you're not paying for it. Idea is that you have option to create auto shutdown, and it's if you go to it, it's pre-enabled by default. You can turn it off if you want, but it's pre-enabled, and it will automatically shut down your virtual machines at 7 p.m. That's the idea, that no one will probably be working after that time, and it just completely shuts down all the environment that for the dev test. In this way, you can have significant saving, because when you look at the price of virtual machine, the one you see in the portal, it will give you a price of virtual machine running for 31 days. If you cut that down to starting that virtual machine only from, let's say, 9 to 5 or whatever your work time is, you can cut down to 1/3 of that price. So it can be another significant saving. Also, when we talk about DevTest Labs, it applies MSDN licensing rules. So everything is 40% cheaper than in production. So we have 40% cheaper virtual machines already, and if we add to that we can save even 1/3 of, cut the cost to 1/3 of that, it can make a significant savings, especially when we're talking both about dev and test environments. So along with setting up auto shutdown, you have option to send a notification to your user. So if you're using some kind of chat to communicate, Slack, Microsoft Teams, or whatever, you have option to create a webhook that will give a notification. Once the shutdown is about to happen, users will receive a message, or it can be an email also. So users will be notified that machines they are using will be shut down. Of course, you have option if you don't want to do that. You can automatically you can disable auto shutdown. But I think the whole point of this is to save resources, and it's a good thing to have around. Okay, so I'll create my DevTest lab. And it usually takes a minute or two to create. Do we have any questions while we wait?
Can we use this on premises?
No. It's not an option at the moment. Basically, any Azure resources you want to use on-prem, it's basically only if you're using Azure Stack. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It can be another way of saving costs, because you have basically, if you want to buy Azure Stack, you have to buy a big box costing around 200,000 euros from a vendor, then you additionally build from Microsoft for every resource you create. But there's something called Azure Stack Development Kit that you can run on your hardware, on your own hardware, and it can spin up kind of a version of Azure. It gives you opportunity to, it gives you same feeling. So all the same tools are used: PowerShell, Portal, command line interface. Everything you use in real Azure, you can use in Azure Stack. Limitation is number of services available in Azure Stack, because at the moment I think you have only virtual machines, storage services, networking, app service, Azure SQL database, and I think functions were announced recently also. So not the whole set of all resources. They're trying to catch up with the real thing, with the public version of Azure, but it's going to take some time. So this is not an option for on-prem, unfortunately. Okay, did this finish? Not yet. Okay, not to keep you waiting. Okay, here it is. Oh. Okay, so there's a couple of things in this blade that we have to consider. One of the things is formulas. You can create images for your clients, for your users, that are allowed to be used. For example, if I go to formulas, first step is I can select operating system and an image I want to use for this formula. It takes some time to load. Usually is with a large list. Okay, so we click Add. And here we have a list of images for virtual machines in Azure. It's a very long list. For example, I'll select, let's say, SQL Server on Windows, standard on Windows. Let's say I want to use that kind of virtual machine. I'll call it SQL 2017. I'll create username. Okay, so here's the thing, I cannot create this one now. I'll have to return because I didn't create a secret. So my secret is a place where you can create passwords, keys that are going to be predefined for your virtual machines. Users, when they create their own virtual machine, can create their own password, but this is for administrator to have some kind of control and can access a virtual machine later. This could especially come in handy if a person leaves a company and you have no idea what the password they created. It gives you backdoor so administrator can add it. I'll create password. I'll say it's password 1, exclamation mark, save. Okay, so it's done. We'll return to the formulas and add new formula. So I started with the SQL one. Let's continue that. SQL Standard Windows. I'll call it SQL 2017. I'll create username. Username, as this applies for both virtual machines in production environment in your Azure subscription and this one, username cannot be admin, administrator, sysadmin, root, and that kind of thing. That's not allowed. Also, most common American names are not allowed as well, like John, Michael, and those sort of things. Luckily for me, Mustafa is not a very popular name among administrators in America, so I'm good to go. I can always create my new name. I can choose either HDD or SSD disk, depending what kind of thing I want to run. Because this is a SQL server, it makes sense to create an SSD disk because I want it to run as fast as possible. I have option to create the size for my formula. So how big machine gonna be, how much resources we're gonna apply for them. So okay, let's leave it at this default version. I'll just select that with 2 virtual CPUs and 8 gigabytes of RAM. Another thing I can do is add artifacts. So here I can add additional software that's gonna be added to my image instantly. So let's say I want to, as this is a SQL Server. SQL Server from version 2016 doesn't come with SQL Server Management Studio anymore. So you have to install it additionally. So let's just add that in the mix. I'll add SQL Server Management Studio. Let's say I want to add, for example, Slack as well. Let's say I want to do Visual Studio Code as well in there. And I'll click OK. Now in my description, I can say that this is SQL Server 2017 with SSMS, Slack, and VS Code. And I have some additional settings for this virtual machine. I can see what network it's going to use, on which subnet it's going to be, if it's going to use public, private, or shared IPs. Also, we have an option for expiration date, so we can say this virtual machine, this formula can be used until this date. After that, just delete formula, no one can use that kind of virtual machine anymore. Also, you can option to have this machine claimable. What is this? This is the option. When I create a machine, for example, I'm the owner of that virtual machine, but a user has an option to ask to claim that virtual machine. So if I'm not using it, I can make it a claimable virtual machine, so someone from my team that's working on the same project might need a similar virtual machine. Not to lose time and spin new one, he can claim this virtual machine and use it for his purposes. Once he's done, I can reclaim it back and become owner of virtual machine again. Also, you have an option when you create this formula, how many instances of the virtual machine is going to be created as well. So I'm going to leave it on 1 because this is just a simple formula for a demo. And formula is really usually created really fast. It doesn't take much time for that. Okay, so on the other hand, I'll create another. For example, I want to have my users using Linux as well. So I'll create this virtual machine, this formula, sorry. With same username rule applies. I'm going to say this virtual machine is going to be HDD only. I don't want this one running SSD because you have to be careful with usage of your disk. HDD disks use standard storage accounts. SSD uses premium storage accounts. There's a big difference on how these storage accounts are charged. So if you create a HDD disk on standard storage account, you, let's say, create 1 terabyte of drive for your virtual machine. You're not going to pay for terabyte, for full 1 terabyte, you're going to pay for actual space you use. So if you have a standard storage disk on 1 terabyte and using only 100 gigabytes of it, you're going to pay for 100 gigabytes, not the whole thing. On the other hand, when you talk about premium storage, the size of the disk you create, you're going to pay for it even if it's totally empty. So once you create a premium storage account disk on premium storage account with 1 terabyte, you're going to pay for full terabyte. So in order to save my cost, I'm going to say, no, I want my virtual machine to be only on standard storage. So I'll have select my disk. You can see that size automatically changes with the size of disk that is supported by. Okay, so I'll select the smaller one in this case. And it's a very long list, as you see. There's different options. We have virtual machines that cost you maybe 50 euros or even less, and we have a large, like for example, this one. It's 1,200 euros almost, with 20 virtual CPUs and 140 gigabytes of RAM. This is not the biggest virtual machine you can get, actually. They have some crazy amount of. This one has 32 vCPUs and 256 gigabytes of RAM. There are even larger ones than that. So, not to lose time on that, I'm trying to find the smallest one. They're usually down there. You can see here, there are some that are absolutely not an option in DevTest labs, and that makes a sense because I don't want to pay 3,000 euros, 3,500 euros per month for a virtual machine that's going to run tests. So, okay, I'll use the basic one, but let's say, I don't know, standard with 2 CPUs and 3.5 gigabytes RAM. I'm going to create such a formula. Okay. Any time now? Okay, here it is. Again, I can add artifacts. Now, artifacts that I could add to my Windows image, my Windows formula, are different. They're different than in this case. Here we have different set of tools that are supported on Linux. For example, I can add MongoDB or Node.js, for example. There's an option for apt-get where you have to name package and literally say, have a, like when you use apt-get, link to where the package is located and import it to your image. You can do that as well. Okay, so I'll create OK. I'll just say in my description that this is CentOS 7.4 with MongoDB and Node.js. Again, I have the same advanced settings and I can create. So I can create as many images as I want and pre-create them for users, and they have an option to create such a virtual machine. So if I go to virtual machines, I'll have none at this moment because none is created. I only created images. I only created formulas for my user that I can choose. So when I create add, so I want to create a new virtual machine. As the administrator of this DevTest lab, I have everything in place. So I have images I pre-created, but I have all those default images in there that can be used by me. So I can select any of these. For example, I can create another virtual machine, for example, using Windows 10. This is also the only place where you can use Windows 10 virtual machines in the standard subscription. MSDN subscriptions have Windows 10 images, but for licensing purposes, Microsoft doesn't allow you to create a Windows 10 image in production Azure subscription. But if this is an Azure production subscription, you have still option to use it in DevTest lab. Why? Because probably you're going to do some client testing, or if you're doing a manual QA, you're going to spin up virtual machine with Windows 10. Okay, let's say I'll use a Windows 10 image. It's going to be Win 10. I'm going to say it uses my secret. Let's leave all the options here. I'll say just because I'm going to test some web application, I'm going to add Chrome, for example, and maybe Firefox as well. So I can create a Windows 10 virtual machine to be used in DevTest lab. And all the rules that we had for formulas are applied here. I can select all the images and pre-create them. Now, interesting place, this is going to take a while to create an actual virtual machine, but where all the magic happening is configuration and policies. Where can we set what users can do and how they can do and what. So I have an option to say what is allowed virtual machine size. In this place, if I enable this, I can say what kind of sizes my users can actually create. I can limit them. I don't want them to create some crazy virtual machine with like 20 cores and 140 gigabytes of RAM. It's gonna cost a fortune, and I don't want them to create such a cost in development or testing environment. So I have an option to say, okay, this is the size of virtual machines they actually can use. Or there's other options. We can see how many virtual machines user can create. So every user, let's say, can create only one virtual machine. And for example, I can also say, because premium disk can be quite costly, I can say, okay, if this is the testing or development environment, I don't want my users to create SSDs at all. I want to cut them off from SSDs. They don't need it. So I can limit that each user can create only one virtual machine and can create none of the SSDs for their virtual machine. Okay, another thing is limits per lab. So I can still, if I'm creating a lab for a team of developers, I can say, okay, this project is bringing in this kind of money, and I'm allowed to create a lab that's gonna cost that. So I can say, okay, for this lab, they can have no more than, let's say, 10 virtual machines, and the limit of premium disks they can use is like only 2. So users, total number of users we give access to this DevTest lab are going to be able to have only 10 virtual machines in total, and they're going to be able to create only 2 premium OS disks. So what's going to happen here, if we have 10 developers and we give them chance to create, everyone can create 2 virtual machines, for example, first users that create those virtual machines are going to be okay with it. But once they hit that 10 limit cap, another next user is going to be stopped for creating it. It's going to have that limit. It's not going to allow them to go over the budget. Another thing, okay, I didn't save this one. I can save it. Another thing is a lab setting where we can say what kind of rights lab users have. Are they only a reader or they are a contributor as well? If they are on a reader level, they can only use existing virtual machines. So if they are a reader, if we assign new user as a reader, only thing they're going to do is they'll be able to claim existing virtual machines, someone already pre-created. If we give them a contributor role, they're going to be able to create new virtual machines. Another thing, aside from that auto shutdown we have, and auto shutdown is created when we create a DevTest environment. Auto shutdown, beside auto shutdown, we also have an auto start option. And this was added recently. It wasn't there for the beginning. So you have that option to start this virtual machine as well. So if you're, as I said, working only from 9 to 5 or whatever, you have option to create auto start for your virtual machines, and they'll be up when everyone comes to work. On the other hand, you maybe don't want to do that as well, because if maybe those virtual machines are not used whole day. Once you auto shutdown, create an auto shutdown, they are shut down at default by 7 p.m. When people come in the morning, they might not use them all the time. So if they are started up at 8 a.m. and used only on around 12, you're wasting money for 4 hours. You're paying for 4 hours that it wasn't used. So if you disable auto start, what's going to happen is that users going to have to connect to DevTest lab and start their virtual machines when they actually need it. Maybe it's not such a bad thing because it only takes a couple of seconds to connect and start a virtual machine, but it can save you a lot of money in the long run. Also, you have option for repositories. Now, repository by default is public repo on GitHub. This is a repo for these artifacts you're adding to your image. When we added Visual Studio or SQL Server Management Studio and that sort of thing, they are in the public. They are in the public version of GitHub repo. You have option to create your own repo and add your own artifacts that are basically JSON files. And you can create whatever software and whatever scripts you want to be running in there. So you can have for example, SQL script that will create something for you or whatever. You can add additional virtual networks. By default, one virtual network is created for your DevTest lab environment. So all the virtual machines in there are on the same virtual network and can communicate with each other. But if you want to have DevTest for different teams, for a couple of teams, and you want to keep those environments separated, you can create multiple virtual networks, and each team can be assigned another network so the virtual machines don't overlap. Also, there's the option for market images, and this is option for if you want to allow your users to create whatever virtual machine they want. So if you disable this option, it's loading still. It's still loading. Still loading. Oh, stop script. Okay, here it is. By default, all the virtual machine, all images are enabled to users. But if you say, oh, go back. If I say no and deselect and click save, now users gonna have access only to images I created. So to formulas, pre-created formulas that I made available for them. They cannot edit them and they cannot create a custom. Another option is a custom image that you can create from VHDs. For example, if you are having some kind of test environment at the moment, running on classical Azure subscription, not in DevTest. As I said, DevTest are much cheaper than production environment. You have option to use that VHD for your current testing or dev environment and import it here and create images based on that. And it can be used for data and whatever you're using that. There's also option for, I think it's back, for data disks. So if you're, for example, creating SQL Server or any other kind of database, you can have a data disk that will contain database and you can run a custom script that will automatically attach database to your virtual machine or whatever. Okay, in this part, what's also really important is access control. So here is the place you add users and give them access rights. So if you want to add a new user, you're gonna say, okay, I want this user to be owner, contributor, reader, whatever you have. Let's say DevTest user, you're gonna create username, for example, and click save. That's gonna take a while. I'm gonna show you how the things look from a user perspective. So if I log in with this account, so I have access to my DevTest lab as a user. And let's say I want to add a new virtual machine as a user. Now, a list usually takes a while. I have only a list of virtual machines I pre-created. I'm not able to see virtual machines that are in the list for admin. Of course, because I set it up this way on the other side. Another thing, I don't know if I have a virtual machine yet created. No, I think I have another. Dashboard, okay. We have virtual machine. I cannot see claimable virtual machine. The one I started isn't, okay, here it is. I didn't make it claimable, I guess. Yeah, I don't have access to it. Anyway, if I created a claimable virtual machine, I would be now able as a user to claim that virtual machine and use it. But when creating it, I didn't say it was pre-created. Okay, so do we have any questions?
Sure. Do you have the ability, similar to Amazon AWS, to create a VPC where you have?
I have no idea what AWS has capability. I'm vaguely familiar with AWS. There are some services I use, but I have no idea.
It's like a virtual LAN, but it's in the cloud. You basically can have your entire corporate infrastructure on an isolated VLAN somewhere inside of your. I don't know if Azure has.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, you can have that. I just don't know how AWS calls it, but you can absolutely. So you have, when you create, in your subscription, you can create a virtual network that's completely isolated, and whatever you put in it, it's off the access. You can kill internet access, create site-to-site connections, and those sort of things. That's a kind of that hybrid cloud scenario is where I best handle things. Okay.
Can we use own these artifacts?
Yeah. You can have, as I said, artifacts are pulled from public repo, but you can have your own repo on GitHub that it's basically a JSON file. There's a tutorial how to create your own artifact, what you have to put in there. So you can create your own repo and call, when you create your formula, you can call your own artifacts to be installed.
And can we claim the group which have one?
I'm not sure about that. To be honest, I'm not sure about that. Any more?
Now Azure have ability to create Kubernetes cluster or Mesosphere or some kind of deployment, and do we have such abilities in that?
No. DevTest at the moment have only option for virtual machines. And Kubernetes with Azure, I wouldn't play with that yet.
Why?
It's not production ready, trust me. Go to Google Cloud at this moment if you want to play with that.
We already tested things like.
Trust me, it's not there yet. It takes time. They need usually when Microsoft tries to catch up with the competition, first try is not so great. It takes for every new feature, it takes a bit time for it to mature to be really production ready. Kubernetes are one of those things that I don't think, maybe by the end of the year or early next year, but at this moment I wouldn't go there. Anything else?
And one more question. And you said that the prices in DevTest is lower than in actual Azure.
Subscription, yes, that's correct. 40%.
And there are new B plans for virtual machines that some kind of have shared CPUs.
There is, that's kind of introduced by Microsoft recently, and you have options to use that kind of virtual machines as well. You have, those are targeted for development and testing, not production ready, because they use shared resources. Similar like if you're using some platform as a service features with Azure, they have an app service plan that's completely free, but it's on shared resources.
And the web apps?
Web apps have the same thing, yeah, that's correct.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
We don't have time for
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.